Hello, I'm Ekow. In this video, I'm going to show you how I bought this property and many other properties using a rent to buy option and how you too can do the same. Let's go. Rent to own is defined as an agreement in which you rent a home for a certain amount of time with the option to buy it before the lease expires. Every option has a definite time period. It gives you the right to buy a specific property in the future for a certain time and for a certain price. Rent to own is by far my favorite. Using options to get control of a property is one of the least risky and most profitable ways to deal in real estate. I use rent to buy option to get 100% finance. The biggest benefit of doing rent to own is there's no bank involved most of the time. Let me give you an example of how to use an option to make big money. Suppose that you are about to become a tenant in a one-bedroom flat apartment. At the time you move in, the property is worth about 70,000 rand. In the process of negotiating with the landlord for a 2-year lease, you say to the landlord, I would like the right to buy this property during the time of my lease for the price of 70,000. The landlord may be willing to give you that right. He may charge you anything from 1 to 5% of the purchase price as an option fee. Often, the price of the option will be deductible from the price of the property. However, it won't be unless you provide in the contract that the amount paid for the option is to be applied against the purchase price. Every option has a definite time period. It gives you the right to buy a specific property in the future for a certain time. But I always pay an option fee equaling at least 1 month's rent. That way, if you default on the lease by missing a rent payment or moving early, the option is still good. So, how do you get a lease option? You simply ask for one. Tell the landlord you would like to buy his property. What would you sell it for? By merely asking any potential seller for an option, you may get one. Perhaps the seller is willing to sell the property to you for 80,000 rand. But at the moment, you are not able to qualify for a loan, or you don't have quite enough money for the down payment. Then you ask the seller if he will give you a few months to raise the down payment. Arrange for the mortgage. Very often, the owner of a property will be willing to give someone a 6 months option in this type of situation. That gives you time to get your deal together, and the details of the options are limited only by your imagination. When you get an option contract from a landlord, it is very important that you have it notarized and recorded with an attorney. Why? Because recording protects you against the seller's change of heart. Let's say you have an option to buy a property for 80,000. And during the course of the next year, the landlord simply forget about it. It slipped his mind. Perhaps because he got a better offer from an outsider of maybe 90,000 rand, totally forgetting about your option to buy the property for 80,000 rand. If you didn't have an option contract notarized and recorded, the new buyer would own the property free and clear. You might have a claim against the landlord, and you would certainly have a good lawsuit, but you want to avoid lawsuits. And if you had the option contract recorded, a new buyer would only be able to get control of the property by buying you out. So, how do you make money in an option deal? Now, suppose you have an option on a property at 80,000. You've been lucky. It's gone up in value to 200,000. That sort of deal isn't unusual, as you may think, especially if it was a multi-family home. and you also had the lease. You may have had a long-term lease, perhaps 5 years. During a 3 to 5 year period, a price rise from $80,000 to $200,000 isn't unusual at all. Still, you may exercise this wonderful option to buy a 200,000 rand property for 80,000 rand, even if you don't have 80,000 rand. At this point, you have several options. You could let the option expire. That wouldn't do you any good. You wouldn't own the property and the landlord will regain full rights. An option must be exercised before it expires. In this case, you would have lost 120,000 rand. That is your potential profit, 120,000 rand. Therefore, I don't recommend this choice. Or you could go to the seller and say, Mr. Seller, let's take out a loan to refinance your property. If you don't know how refinance works, watch my video on how to refinance a home loan. Getting back to our story, now that the property is worth 200,000, you wouldn't have any problem getting a loan for 100,000 on it. Then I will take over the property and assume your new loan. At this point, you will have to make it worth the seller's while. You may want to offer him, say, 5,000 or 10,000 extra on his property. If the seller got 100,000 loan under these conditions, it will be in your favor. You could walk away with an extra 10,000 cash at the close. All you do is to assume the seller's new loan of 100,000 and make all payments on it thereafter. Result: you bought a property with 90,000 that the seller borrowed. To get your seller to cooperate with you, you will of course have to convince him that you are a reliable person and you won't default on the loan.